The action plan I proposed centered around the question, what is the most effective way to communicate abstract concepts to ESL students? I chose this topic because working with ESL students is something I am very familiar with, but unfortunately, so is sometimes struggling to teach certain concepts to students whose first language is not English. My theory of action is implementing various research-based strategies in my practices through quantitative data collection. I plan to have the research culminate with providing me with an effective way to convey abstract ideas to my desired demographic of students. The data I used to create a plan of action was a variety of items targeting how ESL students perceive the complex and somewhat foreign information taught to them daily. I found that technology is a great way to boost ESL students' motivation to tackle abstract concepts and is a best practice approach. I used a specific technology website called Khan Academy, where it instructs students in a way that is easier for them to understand than traditionally with a pencil and paper. This website provides students with videos, visuals, extra practice, and individualized instruction to better their understanding of specific abstract concepts. It tracks the students' strengths and needs digitally based off their mastery of standards and provides rigorous work for them to do. The data revealed that my students completed more work online than they typically did with paper and pencil work during direct instruction, guided practice, and independent practice time. The next data tool I chose to help create my action plan was having ESL students work in small group settings to maneuver through abstract concepts. I kept track of their progress, behaviors, and mastery of standards in a binder. Each small group session targeted the students' mastery of specific skills and showed to be effective. Students were more likely to ask questions and be more engaged in working through tough concepts in small group settings. If they were struggling in the small groups, it was easier for me to understand and address that. I was able to see my students' strengths and needs in reference to mastering concepts. From this data, I realized that my students being in small group settings made a big difference in their academic performance, so I made this a top priority to incorporate in my action plan. The last data source I used was not as effective as I hoped it would be, but it still proved to serve some of its purpose. It involved ESL students filling out a weekly reflection sheet. This self-assessment tool was supposed to serve the purpose of having students take a moment to reflect on what topics they felt they understood well and what they did not understand as well. I intended for this to give me more insight from their end on their mastery of abstract concepts. I assumed that if they had time set aside at the end of each week to think about what they understood and see what others understood when they got to take a tour of everyone's sheets, that it would make them more motivated to close the gaps in the knowledge that they noticed as well. The only issue I found with this data source that slightly weakened its effectiveness was that my students were a little bit too young to delve into the complexities of this assignment. It has a lot of pieces where students needed to think critically and make comparisons and connections. However, it was a little too advanced for my third grade students to do properly. So, the stakeholders for this action plan will take on the role of making sure this plan serves its purpose. Its purpose is to serve students who are often overlooked in the educational system for a variety of reasons. With education being a fundamental part of development in this country, it is a stakeholder's discretion whether or not ESL students sink or swim in the education system. There are no real policies or practices set in place for students who are not suffering from learning, cognitive, or physical disabilities, but that are suffering from the educational gap due to the uncontrollable circumstances going on in their lives. This is the next big thing stakeholders could do to ensure the United States promise of equitable education is upheld. The biggest thing stakeholders will have to provide in my action plan is some sort of technology for these students to access since it is essential for providing academic progress and has shown to do so. This should be advocated for immediately and firmly. If the actions I described are taken, I believe academic records will show decreases in the educational gap plaguing the country. These efforts are worthwhile to invest in.